Why don't we start off by you saying your name, what you do, and what year you won Woman of the Year. Go ahead, Becky.
I'm Becky Johnson, Vice President for OSU-Cascades, and I won in 2015.
Great.
I'm Carol Stiles. I won in 2018, and I'm currently the Executive Director of Stroke Awareness Oregon.
I'm Julie Harrelson, and I won in 2017. I'm the fund manager for Cascade Funds.
Awesome. My name is Mo Carrick, and I'm the founder and principal of Momentum, and I won in 2016.
Cool. Okay, so let's get this started by having some fun. And we're going to play a little Never Have I Ever, because we want to get to know you just a little bit better than you probably want us to know you. So, let's start it off. So, you lift your paddle up, one side it says, I have done this thing. The other side says, I have not done this thing. So, let's start with the first one that's not very comfortable. Because that's why we were all here. So, never have I ever been called to the boss's office. Yes. Okay. Never have I ever written a book. Okay, wow.
I think
When-
I might be confused. I have not, or I have? It's a
You
double
have written a
negative.
book.
Oh yeah, I have written a book. Okay.
Have I ever been confused?
Yes.
Oh. I love it. I love it.
Perpetually.
All right, here's a really important one, earth-shaking. Have you ever been disco dancing? I don't think less of you.
It's women of a certain age.
Okay, Carol, guess
That's
what
right.
we're gonna do?
All right. Gone skydiving.
No
Oh.
way.
Okay.
We have some work to do, ladies. We gotta go skydiving.
Yeah, I can see this party happening afterwards. All right, so never have I ever, or I have, visited the White House or had a picture with a president or his or her, well, it's not her yet, spouse. Have I been to the White House? Okay, who has had their picture taken with a president of the United States and or their spouse?
Oh, I should not be Woman of the Year.
Mine's qualified though, because he
Because
wasn't
I've
president
been
yet.
in some of your offices and I've seen some really interesting pictures of
Less
you.
as, I guess I refused when they invited me.
Oh,
Wasn't my favorite president,
That's a
so
good
I didn't
story.
go.
Oh, that's a good story in and of itself. Okay. Never have I ever pretended not to be home when someone rang the doorbell.
Of course. And we know which group it was too.
Waited tables for a living.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Rite of passage. Participated in the polar plunge.
absolutely
Oh, I
not.
want to though. I want to.
Wow. You go, girl. All right, this is easy. Gone skiing.
Oh,
Not well.
All right. All right. No, we're not judging.
quality is not a part of
Not
this.
judging. All right. Failed a class. Wow. Cool.
I'm the loser. It was Latin. It was
Oh,
Latin. That makes
There
a
you go.
difference.
Yeah. Okay.
That doesn't count.
Doesn't count.
No.
Yeah, somebody might think differently.
I didn't
Okay.
fail. I didn't fail home ec, but it did take me 3 months to make a tank top.
I made a
But now
smock.
I'm actually good at it. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good for you. I never did get good at that. All right. How many of you have jaywalked?
Oh God, all the time.
Oh, of course, it's
Oh, wait,
Ben.
I have.
It's
Yeah.
That's the
Ben.
only way to get
All
anywhere.
right. No police are watching. All right. Then bungee jumping.
No way.
Skydiving and bungee jumping are
Yeah.
possibly in our future.
Had a conversation with an animal.
I mean, like this morning.
That's what I was saying. Just
Every
a
day,
couple hours ago.
several times. Followed a wild dream. Yes. Loving
I want to
that.
know more.
Okay, let's do one more. Had a pet named after a pop star. I knew it. I knew. All right,
Okay,
the
which
last question. How many of you have ever sang in front of an audience?
Oh my God.
All right. All right. So that was a warm up. Love it.
I don't know what the pop star name was. Of
Yeah,
the animal.
tell us.
No.
Davy Jones.
Davy Jones.
No. He was like my guy.
No.
Davy Jones. David Cassidy.
No. No.
Wow, this
We're
is
not gonna
worth
find
looking
out.
into.
We're gonna do this one off
You're gonna
camera.
have to ply her
Alright.
with a little alcohol first.
Petula.
Yeah.
Mariah.
Kenny G. All right. Okay, so we're going to ask a few questions, just have a little bit of a dialogue about what it's like to be nominated and to be living the dream of Woman of the Year. And have some discussions about how that affects others around you, as well as how it affected your life and your work and that sort of thing. So I want to start out with just asking you to tell each of us, what was it like to be nominated when you found out? How did that make you feel? What were your first thoughts? Do you want to start, Mo?
Sure, that we won.
Yeah.
Like
No,
what-
just
or that we were
nominated.
nominated.
Just nominated.
I was really surprised when I was nominated, because I had nominated a couple of people that year. It's something it was fun to do. And so then when I learned that I was nominated, I was surprised, I was curious, and then I didn't think much of it. I was like, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I was surprised, and I had not lived in Bend very long. I hadn't lived in Central Oregon full-time for about 3 years, and I found it great because, I just hadn't been here very long, and I had really tried to contribute to the community. So I was pleased to be recognized, and I also felt humbled in the sense of, there's a lot of women here doing really great things. So I felt very appreciative to be nominated.
I was surprised, of course, and I was so humbled and just rather taken aback that somebody would do that. And my family has been here many, many years, and we've done many, many things in the community. So it was very sweet to me to be acknowledged for that work. My approach is I just kind of put my head down and do what I think is the right thing to do and find the people to support in that. So it was sweet to be acknowledged for my efforts.
I was also surprised and hadn't lived here that long. Like, I was here probably 6 years, but in the Bend tradition, you have to live here for about 50, I think, before you're
Before you're
considered
accepted.
an actual Bendite. But that was a tough time for me in OSU-Cascades. That was when there was a lot of controversy over the location of the university, and so you know how when people are loud and vocal, that's what you hear in your head all the time. And so to be nominated for something where people are recognizing the work that you're doing, has merit. It was a good time for me.
It's interesting that you say that, Becky, because when I was nominated, one of my initial thoughts was that it can't be true that I was nominated because Becky won the previous year. Like in terms of this is a mistake. And because I don't think I nominated anyone for Woman of the Year, but for some of the other awards. And so I just was sort of like in some denial because I was so pleased because you were the first winner of the Woman of the Year, and I didn't put myself in all the same category.
That is a very true statement. When I looked at who was in the pool of nominees with me, I felt the same, like, whoa, what am I doing in this group of auspicious, fabulous females?
It's kind of interesting. I think a lot of women do that, and in leadership positions, and also coming up is that sense of imposter syndrome.
That's right.
And I think a part of that is if you've been told your whole life, or kind of systemically or in your family or whatever, that you're not really doing what you're doing, then it doesn't feel like you're doing what you're doing. So what you contribute sometimes doesn't necessarily register. So I think we all said we were surprised. And I think that's an interesting feature of women in leadership generally, that it's hard to recognize what has been accomplished. And also, I think there's a sense of wanting to be inclusive of others in that process, right? And not have an award like this be exclusive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit more and talk about what it's like to be lifted up by your peers. Is it comfortable for you? Is it comfortable when you went up and you received your award and there are a whole room of folks that are out there recognizing you? What does that feel like, and what do you think it says about who gets the recognition and what traits go into that? That's all a lot of questions, but tell me a little bit about the experience of, hey, I'm standing up here, I want others to stand up here next year after me. What does it take to be there? What do you think separates people? What do you think folks are looking for when you're nominated?
For me, I was so convinced that I didn't stand a prayer, and I was just honored to be included in that group. And I'd broken my foot, I had a boot on,
Yeah.
and I sat right smack in the middle of a row, much to the horror of Connie Drewliner and many other people who knew that I had been selected. So, aside from the fact that I had to step on 15 sets of toes to get to the stage, I think for me, a couple of things stand out. First, again, it was like total shock, a humility, a sense of being, oh my goodness, there are so many other people who do so much more than I do. But then I heard my 17-year-old in the audience whooping and cheering, and I think that made more difference to me than anything. Because here's this 17-year-old kid who doesn't get most of what's going on in the world, but this was important to him. So that was a very personal thing for me to experience. And the other thing is, I have the honor of mentoring leadership students in Herat, Afghanistan, and primarily women. And when I hear the stories of these women, how they grew up under the Taliban, and the fear and the obstacles they overcome, I'm totally in awe. And what I felt when I walked to the lectern, and I mentioned that in my acceptance, was we are so blessed in this country to be able to acknowledge outstanding women and to have an event like this without fear. So for me, it was just this wonderful feeling of gratitude.
Nice.
I remember thinking about all the other women, some of them sitting right next to me with their notes, thinking that, you know, if I win, I gotta know what I'm gonna say, right? So all these women are sitting there looking, and it made me feel a little bit bad, right? I mean, I wanted everybody to win, and I think this is something that a lot of women feel, right? They feel like everybody's deserving, and I don't want to be held up at the expense of someone else. But of course, it feels wonderful to be recognized, and I appreciated that. But I remember, and I think the Chamber does a good job of celebrating the nominees and bringing them all up on stage and having the event the night before. And I think that's really helpful, because just being nominated is deserving of recognition.
Yep. I agree.
And it's interesting to get awards in that sense, because, you know, part of what I feel is really similar to what you two expressed, so I won't repeat that, but the whole notion of winning versus success. So when I got the award, part of the reason that I have put myself into the professional position that I put myself into is that I felt like if people can't see themselves in things, then they wouldn't necessarily be interested or inspired to do it, right? So, as an example, fund managers across the country, less than 10% are women. And so part of the reason that I did it is that I wanted to help show that it's possible to do something. Has it been easy? No, it's been probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my career. Has moving to a new community been easy? No, it's been very, very challenging. I mean, I chose to do it and it's been fun, but it's been a lot of work. And so what I like in these awards ceremonies is if you take the essence of the people that are getting the awards and you say, these are things that are important in our community, right? Standing up for certain things, being kind, being professional, bringing humor to being professional, you know, those kinds of things, persistent honesty, integrity, certain level of vulnerability. If that shows up in the people that win the awards, then what our community is saying is that's important to our cultural fabric. of our community. And with so many new people coming in to our community, I think it's important for people to see that these things are an important part of the fabric of our community. So as we scale, we have that in the DNA and in the fabric of our community.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, especially what you're saying about what you all are saying. I'm hearing a real thread to what it felt like for me, which was like, oh wow, those qualities that I try to manifest are what's seen, and I definitely saw it in the other nominees for the Woman of the Year, but also for the other categories. And it's interesting because I have lived here also for so many years. So for me, that was part of what was such a surprise, was that I've been here since '93, and I guess, you know, to be honest, since most of my clients are men, and I'm around men most of the time, and so to be for an award that was all women, part of me was like, whatever, like, because I'm not seeing very much. I don't necessarily think that much about the community of women, and I've never won anything. Like, I've never won, even like a gift basket, like, or a lottery
No door
ticket.
prize?
Right, totally, no
Wow.
door prize, no, I've literally like never won anything. And my interview went so badly, as we all know from my speech, because I had the crying and the bloody nose and, you know, the year, like at the same time. You weren't there, Katie, to remember, but it would go down in infamy because I was like literally leaking bodily fluids, and Connie was like, we have another interviewee, Mo, you have to stop bleeding and leave the room here.
This was before live FaceTime.
Oh my gosh, and so I was sure that I didn't win. And it was the last award of the night, and I was like, I'm not done. And I was also very anxious because 2016 for me was a really hard year. It was a really hard year. I had a lot of family issues with one of my kids, and also with my husband, who that day had a feeding tube put in. And bless his heart, had come out with me. He was being treated for cancer, his first of 2 bad cancers. And I remember thinking, this thing has got to end soon, because he's had surgery today. Like, I just couldn't believe that he was sitting, and I kept saying, do you want to leave, do you want to leave? Because I was in the middle too, and I was like, I'm not going to win, so like, we can just, and he kept saying, no, I'm fine, which I now know that I think that he had a heads up from you to like keep me there. But I was still so surprised I didn't have anything ready. And so that was my initial thought, was like, oh God, I have nothing to say, I'm not ready at all, you know. And then just feeling like, you know what, just be present for this, because you've never won anything, and feeling seen. I think that was the overall feeling for me, having been in business in this community. I started my business here in 2001, and sometimes, I'll be honest, in what has been sometimes a man's club for me, in Central Oregon in terms of business, it's less so now, but I felt, wow, this is cool. Like, there was a piece of me that didn't believe that they were saying my name, and then that I thought, I feel seen, you know, for the first time in a long time. So it felt good. And then it was also super embarrassing because I had nothing to say. I just was glad I didn't bleed on anyone. Cry.
And we were probably all glad that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good segue. Here's my next question. Is there a point in your career, it doesn't even have to be your career, in the making of you, where you weren't seen and you were facing failure or a really rough spot and you're not up on the main stage? What strength did you draw from? How do you keep going? Because you're women of consequence, and that doesn't come from, you know, powder puff kind of background. That comes from grit. So is there anything you want to share with us when the lights aren't on and the speeches aren't being made, that you think kind of was one of those pivotal moments, let's do this now, that you want to share with us?
I
This was a
really
surprise
like
question.
the word
Good
you
job.
used, women of consequence, because I never think of myself that way. And as Mo said, not being seen is okay with me. That's kind of my style. I can do it. I love talking to groups and talking about what I'm passionate about. But that's a really interesting way to look at us, women of consequence. And to go back to answer your question, yes, there were more than one time, many times, when there were struggles, because in the field that I was in, which was totally public service and not business, it was male dominated, and presented a number of challenges. And I think there were a couple of things that kept me going. One was just a firm commitment that we were doing the right thing for the right reason, for the right people. And then the team of people that I was blessed to have around me needed someone to say, we're going to do this. We can do this. We believe this is the right thing. And that's where the whole servant leadership concept comes in for me. And I was able to draw on those principles and those values and keep charging ahead. And I think the other thing is having a good support system in the wings.
Yeah, for sure. One of the words you used, is a great question, by the way, was, grit, I think you said. And I was thinking about the fact that for me, the vast majority of moments have actually been not the award-winning moments.
Absolutely.
Like, most of it's just been a grind. Like, I can think back to a lot of times in my career, not that my career has been bad, I've had a wonderful career, I feel really grateful. And it's been really hard at times, and there are some pivotal moments. Like, one that I remember being really a dark and hard time was when I had my first child, because I was completely unprepared. I worked in high tech. No one around me had children. There was no knowledge of how to navigate the terms, and I went back to work after 6 weeks being like, what the heck has happened to me? Like, how am I gonna do this? Driving an hour to take my child to daycare in Seattle and then driving to the office, and I remember thinking, I just can't do it, and then doing it. And then similar things, having to travel so much as a young mother with 3 kids and being like, well, I don't want to go away again for the 240th day of the year, but I must. Surviving divorce, having to fund a business with no capital, being like, gosh, I really want to do this cool thing, but where do I find the money? Getting no, having clients tell me no, getting no on jobs, because before I was a consultant, I was an employee, getting rejected, which thankfully for me, I've had lots of yeses, but there have been no's. I remember my co-author and I, Cammie Dunaway, on my first book, getting 50 rejection letters in a row, and her calling me, she was on holiday, and she said, I think I'm out. I don't think I can take another one, and the next 2 were, publishing offers, and I was like,
Nice.
thank goodness, but that happened. But I think, and then there are some days for me that are like where I'm really tired. I've been working, this happened to me maybe a month ago, I'd been working 22 days straight. I didn't have a day off because of travel and everything else, and I remember thinking, I do not want to go to work today. I just want to lay down and go to bed. And I knew that wasn't an option. And so I think for me, it's like, why do I do that? Why do I do the hard thing? There's a variety of reasons. One is a team supporting you, also a team depending on you.
Yes.
As someone whose income has mattered to my family, it's like, yep, that's what you do. And I also have been very fortunate for most of my career to really feel a calling that the work had some meaning beyond just the grind,
Yes.
Which has always mattered to me, because there's a lot of work that I do that I would do even if I wasn't getting paid, but I've had to be paid, so that's all, I'm grateful, for that too. So I think sometimes it's just a hang in there game, and then that's part of, for me, why the award and why the process that the Chamber's doing for all businesses with your variety of awards, but I think also for the Women's Award is so powerful, because it does sort of give you that snapshot of being able to say, hey, this someone's watching, the community's watching, you're being supported in what is often just a grind. I don't know if that captures any of what you guys would say.
Well, I remember in graduate school not having a lot of women graduate students in my field, and then when I got to the College of Forestry, there were 5 women faculty members, probably out of 100, and when I left 20 years later, I think there were still 5 women. But the good thing was that there was a great support network of men. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned rejection letters in the world of academia. You submit journal publications and you get a lot of rejections, and this is the only way you're going to get tenure. You got to publish. You submit grants, you get rejections, and it is devastating. But I always found that there were men colleagues who were there to say, well, it feels terrible right now, but set it aside, come back the next day, let's work through it point by point, resubmit it, we can do that. But probably the biggest challenge or disappointment I had was I actually applied to be the leader of OSU-Cascades when it first opened in 2001, and I was one of 2 finalists. And I just had my heart set on that job, and I did not get it. And remember just feeling, horrible about that. I thought it's so incredible of an opportunity to start a new university in Bend. And of course, what happened was I had 10 years in Corvallis to move into some very important administrative roles. So when the job came open again 10 years later, I was in a better position and ended up doing it. So things happen for a reason, and you put your head down and you keep working.
I think when you brought this up and the stories kind of underscore this, but is the role that fear can play. And so I've had this internal motto for years, is like, as an entrepreneur, I wake up every day with a little terror in my heart and a smile on my face, because you just never know what's going to happen. And I also think that I'm glad that there's a lot more conversation now in leadership around things like anxiety and depression and worry, and what it takes to actually do this. Because if any of us had stopped because we were afraid, we wouldn't probably be sitting here today, right? And so people say, well, Julie, you're so calm, but really the truth is I'm scared a lot of the time, because I'm trying to sort out what the best path is. As an entrepreneur, really, there's very little between you and your success or failure except you, right? So I feel like that part of things, we don't talk about a lot. Like, people like to talk about like really inspiring things, like how I conquered this. Like, if you look at LinkedIn or anything, you see all these things about, I have achieved great heights, I'm climbing up the mountain, or I can jump from the floor on top of this stool. And, really a lot of it is just showing up every day. It's a practice.
Absolutely.
It's a practice of mindfulness and being present and trying to take into account all the factors to actually achieve a vision. And the vision may adjust, but we're all heading that way. Like, if Becky had given up when when there was a lot of pushback from the community, and or you had said, well, I'm not going to do this because of pressures, or all these different things that we've talked about, then these cool things wouldn't have happened.
I really appreciate, Julie, you bringing that topic up of this being afraid, the anxiety, because I'm sure every one of us has faced that, and nobody wants to talk about it because we've got it all together. And having that on the table, I think, is really important for any woman that might be watching this, or man, anybody in that leadership position, to be able to acknowledge, guess what, you're human.
Yeah.
And showing up every day, whether you're scared or not scared, is really half of what gets it done. It's just being there.
Well, and I love what you're saying, because we don't ever have it really together, right? I mean, the truth is, we don't. Like, we're showing up with a smile, but it's like, there's always something like, I'm not sure that I have it really ready.
That's so true.
One of the things that underlines what you're saying, Julie, happened to me when our first book came out. We had a chance to present it South by Southwest. And I'll never forget this, and I had written about depression and entrepreneurs. I mean, I know that it's a dynamic, but I was sitting, Cami and I were waiting to give our talk, and we were very nervous, so I went out to the ladies' room, and there was a huge line outside the thing at South by Southwest, and I was like, wow, are all these people waiting for us? It was literally around the corner, probably 150 people waiting, mostly men. And I asked one of the guys, are you waiting to come into our session? It's gonna be great. And he's like, is it the one on depression and anxiety and entrepreneurs? I'm like, no, it's not that one. And he that was the one. It was standing room only. And
Wow.
it really reminded me of what I see and hear in my clients. When we talk about the realities of being in business, of launching an institution, of doing the work that we do, it's scary as heck. It takes a lot of vulnerability, and it doesn't always work out. And I think that being able to talk about that, especially in some ways for women, right? Because I think sometimes women, in what I sometimes refer to as the culture of comparison, we tend to compare ourselves often to other women in ways that are really negative. She's bigger size than me, she has more degrees than me, and I think it's important to be able to be like, yeah, and I can't see what she's dealing with.
Yeah.
I don't know that unless I ask her, but I'm sure it's probably as hard as what I'm dealing with, and to be able to let down some of that guard around it's all perfect on the outside.
Well, Carol mentioned this about the support system, like your group, your crew, and I always think about this like people that, you can call and, you know, talk about things in a way where they're really trusted, and they'll support you no matter what. And, you know, having people that you know that are experts, and, you know, giving and receiving enough to actually build those relationships is a really important part of leadership, I think. And I think we have a lot of that in our community because the size is such that we can access each other pretty easily too.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the partnerships and the support system. So we each have our own, but I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like when we're reaching out to men for partnerships in this, the Me Too, and just the age that we're in. It's all part of an evolution of how women are in the workplace. We rely on men. We need them to be successful. How do you see men's roles in successful women? Let's start with that, and because I also want to ask the color question. How do we raise up and interact with women of color at the same time? So if you could just talk a little bit about how you see men's roles in this, and how you see our roles as white women helping women of color.
Well, I think that whenever you're in a leadership position, part of your responsibility is to ensure the success of the people around you. And whether that's people of color or men, everybody comes with their own background and their own history, and part of it is recognizing that, learning what that is, learning how they got to where they are, what they need to be successful, and it's all different. And I think where you make the mistake is if you assume there's just a one-size-fits-all, and that person made it this way, so now I expect you to do the same. And I think it's hard to recognize all those differences and try to find the strengths, pull out the strengths, work on the weaknesses so that everybody can be successful. But I do think there's a lot of things to celebrate in our differences, in our diversity, and not try to make everybody the same in order to be successful.
Yeah. This is such a good question again, Katie, and it's something that's really top of mind for me in the work that I do, in both areas, both with regard to partnership with men, but also with men and women of color. On the gender issue, here's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like men, you're absolutely right, we not only depend on men, but we partner with men. I mean, my male mentors, my male clients and colleagues and employees have been really significant to my journey, and I value them and trust them. And they have had some privilege that I haven't had, and so there's some really interesting conversations about that. Some of the men that are the closest in my inner circle are doing a lot of work at looking at their own privilege as white men and unpacking what that means. And I think for me, there's a bigger piece of that, which I recently spoke about at TEDx Salem, which is around what is it that men need in order to be full and complete people in this earth. And I think there's more there that we haven't fully tapped into. And one of the examples that comes up for me a lot is the dynamic of how to balance caregiving with work, especially in executive positions where, you know, most of the women I know who are senior executives, they either have a stay-at-home spouse or they have a, you know, full-time caregiver. And many men that I speak with that are in senior roles describe loss and regret at what they've had to give up. And yet we continue to kind of perpetuate an expectation that that's the price you pay for senior leadership. And so one of the opportunities I think that's available for men and women together is to re-examine what does it mean if men are primary as caregivers, and what does it mean if women are primary for income? Because the other piece of it for me is that women, the culture of women isn't as strongly supportive of ambition. And you know, women who make a lot of money or want to make a lot of money are often denigrated, I think, a little bit, whereas men are revered for that. And so for me, that creates a real tension that we can't talk about. And I hear it with male clients I work with. For example, many of my clients have implemented paternity leaves, but many young men aren't taking it because they say, I feel pressure that I won't look as good, you know, as competent. And I know that women have felt that too. So I feel like there's still some real work around the roles we play at home and in business if we're really going to get the kind of parity that we want around wage and authority. So that's some of what's surfacing for me. And I also am really troubled by some of the dark sides of the Me Too movement. One of which is I have had clients say to me that they're uncomfortable meeting with me now alone. And that doesn't help any of us, you know. And so I'm pushing on that and talking about it out loud, but I feel like we need to find a way to be able to be responsible and to talk about what's the difference between harassment and a mistake, between abuse and something verbal. I had a client who said to me recently, Mo, a woman was in my office last week and she was crying because of the loss of her father. And I've known her for 25 years, and all I wanted to do was put my arm gently on her arm, my hand gently on her arm to comfort her, but I didn't do it. And I thought, gosh, how sad, because that's a natural human response to empathy, and she probably was wishing that you would. And so here's, you know, and he's a good man, you know, he's not trying to do anything wrong, but he's also saying, I don't know how to navigate this. And so being able to talk about it and say, you know what, that's a normal instinct, it probably would have been totally fine because you and she know the difference between that and something that might be abuse. So I feel anxious for more conversation there. And I don't want to dominate the conversation, but the other piece for me is just around race. And I hosted last week, for my book tour, I'm doing listening sessions with white women and women of color, trying to really talk about this. And it was a really awesome session. We had it over at the UU. And we talked in caucus groups, so white women talking with white women and women of color talking with women of color. And I think that's really important, especially at work, because we as white women have benefited a lot more. We've benefited disproportionately from the women's movement than women of color at work. At least that's what I see in my client base. And so I'm feeling an urgency right now to talk with more women like you all, more white women, to look at my own racism and yours, and to talk about what we don't see that we need to see, so that we can be stronger allies to women of color and men of color, but to really be able to look at our own systemic advantage and make a difference, rather than what I see white women doing often, which is being really fragile, sometimes around the feeling like they might be racist, and also turning to women of color to give us the answers. And I think that's unfair. I think it overburdens them and over fatigues them for the work that we need to do, that I need to do. I'll leave it there.
Or that we need to do together.
Yeah.
I think as we have this conversation, I keep going back to the phrase relationships are everything. And coming together as white women and women of color and forging new ground together, redefining the culture together. I think that's probably the gift we could give to the future generations.
And not being so fragile about it and precious about it, because it's you know, I think a lot of the things that I mean, I've really tried hard, you know, especially the last few years, to learn to suspend my assumptions and be really curious, and you know, and what happens, I think, is one of the first responses is you can really feel ashamed or embarrassed, but that's not helpful.
Not if it stops you, especially.
It's
right?
What's that?
Not if it stops you,
Yeah,
especially.
it's helpful. It's helpful as information, but it's not helpful to stop trying and stop, you know, reaching out and finding those things. Because I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of, you know, we always hear this conversation about, well, we want diversity and inclusion, but you can't have diversity and inclusion without equity, right? So the way I've been framing that in my head is, there's a big difference between being invited and being welcomed, right? And so, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. If we had like 6 hours, or 6 weeks, or 6 months, or 6 years, right? But
Could I ask a question of these ladies, because you're all so smart and insightful? What would you say to the generation of the 20-somethings about this issue and how to go forward? You mentioned the hashtag #MeToo movement and some of the fractious issues around that. What would you say? How would you lead those ladies?
Well, I think the younger generations, for me, they have a ton of courage that my generation didn't have, to be honest. I mean, I think, for example, even examining my own racism and working with my mother and examining hers, like we're getting better, but we're not at best. And I think my daughter's a lot more skilled. around how she talks about race, around how she navigates it, around what she sees and doesn't see, and how that navigates. So I have a lot of hope there. But I also think that they have a lot, so I think they have a lot to teach us. And at the same time, many of my experience of younger women is they haven't experienced sexism and racism fully yet, because they haven't entered the workplace fully. And so there's sometimes some denial, like, that it still exists. And so I think that's just sometimes born of experience. So I'm not sure what I would tell them. Keep being honest, keep partnering, keep looking at the dark side, and being willing to sit with someone when they tell you their story about how they've experienced the world.
How do you see this, Becky? You see a lot more
Yeah,
young people
good
than we
question.
do.
I-
How's this
I
changing?
think that when you say they haven't experienced this in the workplace yet, but they experience it in school
Yeah, that's true.
all the time. And I still hear stories of high school girls that drop out of school because they've been sexually assaulted, and maybe they end up pregnant, but even if not, they're ashamed, they don't want to go back to school. I think it happens way more than you think. And at the university, a lot of freshman women come and never come back after the first term because they've had some type of negative sexual experience.
Yeah.
So I think it makes a big impact on girls and women, and I think that we need male allies again in this movement. And I understand, we always go too far one way and then we swing back, and so it's finding that middle ground. But girls and women have to feel empowered and feel like if they're in an uncomfortable situation that they know how to handle it. And I think that because of their experiences just from day one growing up and how society treats girls and women, they don't have those skills, and they get in an uncomfortable situation, and it often doesn't end up as well as we would like it to.
No, I think you're so right. And what happens if men talk to each other differently? That's the other thing that I'm noticing. I was talking with one of my sons who's in his early 20s, and he was saying that after one of the notable incidents that had been going on in the Me Too movement, he was watching the news and noticing what was happening, and all of his women friends were very activated about it, talking about it, marching against it. He marched with them. And he said, Mom, it was so hard because I wanted desperately to talk to my male friends about it. And they wouldn't talk to me about it. And so he finally got brave and he asked 5 guys over and he said, let's have a beer and let's talk about what this means to us. What is rape culture? What is harassment culture? What does it mean? He said, because we're all part of it.
Right.
And we've got to be able to talk about it with each other so that we can say to each other, dude, that's not cool. That's not how we roll.
Yeah.
Right? And I was so proud of him. I mean, of all my parenting moments, when my boys do something like that, I'm like, hoo-ha, good on you. But it was also a cry out to say, and I think for me as a woman and as a mother, to say how do men talk to other men, as well as being allies to women, to interrupt those behaviors that are corrosive and sometimes quite subtle, that put women in vulnerable positions.
And I think, and just back to the men's role and women's success is interesting to me at work, because it seems like women are way over, if they're helped, they're over-sponsored and, over-mentored and under-sponsored. So, if we take that and just break it down, it's like, well, this is what you should do this and this and this and this, rather than, let me introduce you to my network. Have you considered going to this? Let me help you navigate your way through this, rather than telling people what to do. And I think that there's a feature of that. But I do think it's, it's no more the way it was with all of these things that we're talking about, and not yet the way it's going to be. It's a very dynamic situation. So giving each other some grace around this, I think, is really important in terms of maybe challenging, but also being respectful in that challenge.
So let's talk a little bit and close here with a discussion around what advice would you give women who are out there trying to do big things? Maybe it's a learned experience that you had and what you learned from it. Maybe it's just some wise advice that you received along the way. What do you want to end on here? What do you want to share with all the fabulous women who are nominated and folks who aren't, on how to keep going, how to keep doing this? and making a difference and being true to yourself?
I think you have to believe in what you're doing, and Mo talked about being willing to do some of the things she does for free, but it's great to get paid for it, right? But you're doing what you love, and you have a purpose, and so find that purpose so that whatever you're putting your life toward has meaning toward you, but then to stick with it and know that there's going to be really hard times. When we were going through this campus siting, I remember some people who have a lot of experience in land development and said, believe me, just trust me, you are going to get through this. It might take you a year, it might take you 2 years, but it'll work out. And if there weren't people saying that, I would have been like, this may never happen, and I might have given up easier, right? But find those trusted people who have been through this, who have the advice for how to get through the tough times, and just work hard and believe in what you're doing and reach your goals.
Well, I would say to all of the nominees and the fabulous women who are nominated this year and the years before, thank you. Just thank you for being who you are, for having the courage to do what you're doing, and keep on keeping on. And I think my advice would be, don't quit, and have the courage to reflect. And I think that's the thing. It's fearful for people, I think, to stop and say, okay, this didn't work out so well. What was my error in this? What should I do differently? I think the other advice I would give is find a tribe, and it should be a diverse tribe that you can reflect with, and that you can get feedback from, and you can get advice from. But don't quit.
So I have a lot of things that I'd like to say, but I think I'll just boil it down to one. And that is, I feel that if you follow your energy, then good will come of it. So we don't have to do things like everyone else does. I think that there's an inner compass that we each have, that if we follow it and we seek input and we pay attention and we care for ourselves and each other, then good will come of it, whatever that is. And to me, that's what success is. It doesn't matter how much money somebody makes or all of that. It really matters is what is your vision for your life, and how do you want to live that out. And it goes to meaning, and it goes to having belonging in a tribe and all those things. But that's often what it comes down to for me when people come to me and say, what should I do about this, or what should I do about that? It's like, pay attention, gather your resources, and pay attention to the direction that your compass is pointing.
I love it. I'm taking mental notes of everything you guys are saying, right? Because we're not done yet. I think the only things that I would add, or maybe like it's an additional layer of what you all are saying, is that it strikes me that I'm thinking of this expression that Brene Brown uses. Most of you know she's a mentor of mine, and she talks about what gets in the way of courage is not fear, it's armor.
Mm-hmm.
Which really rings true to me around the ways that I've misstepped in my professional and personal life, which is that the biggest missteps have been, for me, the times when I've overprotected myself and not been open to challenges and feedback. It's like the feedback that I've gotten and the challenges and the times when people have said, no, that's not probably the best thing for you. Those have been the most seminal moments. And I think as women, I can't speak for all of us, but I can speak for myself. I was probably over-nurtured by society at large to be supportive and to look for support, not to be challenging and to look for challenge. And I think it takes both muscle sets. Like, I want support, I want community, and I want care and compassion, but I also want the truth. And so I think one thing I would say is, like, seek the truth. Ask people, how are you coming across? What do they think of what you're doing? Because those, to me, as hard as it is, and I've been just as defended as the next person, where I'm like, you're wrong, only later to find 10 years later, that person was really right, and now I'm wiser, And the other thing that comes to mind for me, which is a continuing flaw that I live out over and over, but I think I would say this to young women today, is like, remember, you don't have to do it all at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, especially with all the pressures that are on women for community and caregiving and partnership and love and work and making money. It's like I have a tendency, I'll speak for myself, to want to do like all of it at the same time. And I think sometimes I want to tighter myself differently. I'm learning, and I think for young women, that's part of what I would say is like, easy does it. My dad used to say, you know, you don't have to do it all at the same time. So.
Well, I've been honored to sit here for a little while with all of you, and just want to celebrate you all and celebrate the night that we're going to share with a bunch of great folks in our community. It's an honor for the Chamber to be a part of this, and there's so many ways that women lead, not only in business but in this community, and thought leaders, and it's just great to have an evening to pause and to recognize each other, and so I'm grateful.
So
Fun
I would
conversation.
think,
Well, I was just probably where you're going, but I was gonna say, while we're being filmed and we have the privilege of saying, but I really want to thank you for your leadership of the Chamber. I was a member of the Chamber early on in my business, and then I quit the Chamber because I didn't find a place there for my business and for the work that I was doing in the community. And the award process, winning, being part of it, watching Becky win, watching you come into your leadership role, has been a huge part of my re-engagement in the role the Chamber can play for our community economically. And so thank you for that.
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
excellent.
Ditto.
Yes,
Very much.
thank you.
Yeah.
This has been a really fun conversation too. Appreciate you convening it, and
Makes me want to sit down and talk some more with all of you.
Right.
I know. When are we gonna go have wine?
And I want to find out the name of your pet.
If anybody finds out, we have to tell the rest of us.
That's right. I know, it's Prince.